Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation. We're coming live. We're about 35 minutes late. There were internet connection problems. For those of you that have followed me and will be watching this, please like and subscribe on YouTube, on Facebook, and on X, where this is being broadcast live. And we're also on Rumble and BitChute. So wherever you see this show, please help us out. Like it and subscribe if you appreciate the content, if you appreciate the guests that I've had on the show. There's over 700 of these shows now that I've done in the 6 years that I've been living here in Yalta in the Russian Federation. And you know, I'm not the only one that's having trouble trying to figure out what's going on in the world, but more importantly, what's going on with President Putin and his circle in the Kremlin, and in their response to a number of things that have been happening to them and around the world. So we're going to try to make sense of this tonight. My guest is returning. I'll introduce him and bring him on in just a second. Peter Kuznick. He's the Associate Professor of History at American University, and he's the founder of the Nuclear Studies Institute at the American University. He's in great demand, really all over the world, for his opinion on most of these things that are happening right now in the world. But tonight, I want to focus on the following. And I'm going to ask for Peter to help us out from his perspective. He's been to Russia many, many times. He knows Russia very, very well. He's very well connected here, many sources. So I'm going to want him to try to help me and my viewers to figure out what is going on. Now, most of you will recall that Putin, an attack was made on his life around, I think it was December 29th, in Novgorod at one of his residents. And it's also part of Russia's nuclear triad. They've got some underground communication base that's there. Did Trump know about it? Because he was in telephone communication with President Putin at that time. And then there was the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife in Venezuela. Russia has a great deal of interest and investments in Venezuela. And then there's the pirating of a Russian-flagged tanker that the United States Coast Guard pirated this tanker, and there were a few Russian, a few Russian sailors that were on. Russia had asked Trump to release those sailors, which he agreed to, I guess, but they didn't do it. Now, given what I've just said, and given the fact that the United States has continued to supply Ukraine with intelligence, satellite tracking, so that they can attack Russia deep into Russia with drones that can only get there with the help of the United States satellites and intelligence. This is happening as I'm speaking to you. Deep into Russia, southern Russia, people have been killed. Apartment buildings have been attacked. These are not Russian military bases or anything strategic. It's apartment buildings. I'm in Crimea, and we lose internet periodically, just about daily, when we are attacked by drones. So I'm going to ask Peter this question. Why, given all of this, does President Putin and Russia continue to entertain dialogue with the United States? Specifically today, Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were invited to meet with President Vladimir Putin. I don't get it. Peter, I want to welcome you back to the show. Can you help me? Can you help me figure out?
I have to make one small correction. I've been a full professor, not an associate professor, for many years now.
Mea culpa.
You've given me a demotion before I even had a chance to get things wrong in our discussion.
Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Peter, I won't make that mistake.
Not a big deal, but since we're going to be dealing with Donald Trump's ego, I wanted to get that off my chest first. But I'm not going to repudiate world peace because you got that wrong.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was quite an introduction that I made about what's happening in the world and what Russia's response is. From where you're sitting, Peter, what do you see is behind the Russian strategy to today to even want to talk to Witkoff and Kuchner, who are not diplomats? Lavrov is not in the room. Peter, from where you're sitting, what the heck is going on?
I got a text message a few minutes ago from Indian TV, and they wanted me on quickly to talk about reports that there's going to be a meeting between the Ukrainians, Russians, and Americans, I think in the United Arab Emirates, tomorrow and Saturday. And that this was going to be this unprecedented, finally, they're going to all get together. And they had reports from, I think it was CBS, saying that there's going to be a three-sided meeting, which some people have been wanting for a long time, especially Zelensky's been calling for that. But then they texted me back and said, no, well, it might not be a three all meeting at once. It might be separate meetings. So they postponed that interview until they could figure it out. But things are breaking at such a breakneck, extraordinary pace right now. You and I spoke recently, and we're dealing with an entirely new global situation in a week from our last conversation. It's maddening and very difficult to keep up with. Based on what Lavrov said yesterday and what Putin's been saying, they're continuing to meet with the Americans for one reason, and that's because we are between 87 and 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And it's absolutely essential that the two global nuclear superpowers have got to maintain contact, discussion, open communications, and try to find ways to ease tensions, even when we don't agree on things. So as Lavrov has made clear, and even Rubio has said the same thing, that we'll agree and work together what we agree on. We'll try to resolve peacefully our differences and our conflicts on what we don't agree on, and we'll try to keep the doors of communications open. We learned this during the Cold War. We learned this during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for most of the period since then, even though the interests have often been diametrically opposed, there's been an effort to maintain open channels of communication. But some of the things that have happened recently, some of which you've referred to explicitly in the introduction, have made that much more difficult. And we can get into those certainly today.
Peter, I appreciate that. Um, I know I've read the entire transcript of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday uh, when he had a press conference, and I printed this out, and it's like, I don't know, 50 pages on my computer, and I went through it very carefully, and I think what Lavrov was saying was basically is we don't want to escalate anywhere. We're trying to maintain relations with everybody. We acknowledge the difficulties that we're facing, Russia is facing. He was incredible in answering the questions of, I didn't count them. I don't know how many there were. There were many that came from the audience. And like Putin, unprepared, well, he was very prepared, but without any teleprompter, without an attorney sitting next to him, without Maria Zahavra sitting right next to him, he basically tried to explain Russia's position.
Yeah.
And I thought I was beginning to understand. But Peter, given what's happened, given the fact that the United States, and it's not NATO, it's not Ukraine, it's the United States that has continually used NATO and Ukraine as a proxy to cross repeated Russian red lines. Now, the ultimate red line for me was the attack on President Putin. Everybody I've talked to here in Russia believes that it was an attack on Putin's life. Whether or not Trump really knew what the heck was going on or not, that's what people here in Russia believe. My question to you, Peter, it's a very simple, direct question. Do you think that the United States deep state, do you think Trump thinks that Putin and the Russian Federation are weak? In their eyes, do they keep escalating without stopping because they think that Russia will not respond forcefully?
I think it's a combination. Yes, they do think Russia is weak, but even more important, they think the United States is omnipotent. They compare Russia's struggle for years to seize the Donbass with the Americans' ability to go in and kidnap Maduro and his wife in a matter of hours in a covert operation in which no Americans were killed, and a lot of Cubans were killed. And the United States planned it flawlessly. And the United States Special Forces and the military have capabilities that are unmatched anywhere. They think that had Putin been able to do the same thing with Zelensky back in 2022, then this war would not have gone on for 4 years. They see the Russians inching ahead in the Donbass in an effort that's costing hundreds of thousands of Russian troops and much of Russia's treasure. And while the United States, they believe, can do anything it wants anywhere. The US bombs Iran. Trump exaggerates the destruction of the Iranian nuclear facilities, but it still was a very successful attack on Iran. Trump can threaten Iran again and has been doing so. It's, of course, absurd. He's egging on the protesters in Iran at the same time he's shooting the protesters in Minneapolis and sending in more troops and more ICE agents to create a police state presence in the streets of Minneapolis. He threatens other countries. He threatens Denmark. He's going to take Greenland by force. And he makes that threats about the tariffs against the Europeans. So the way he looks at it now is that he can do anything he wants militarily. He doesn't care about the quote unquote rules-based international order. He's willing to sacrifice NATO. He's willing to blow up his European alliances. He demeans the Europeans, demeans NATO, demeans individual leaders, Macron and others. And he feels that, he feels like he can do anything he wants. He's the world's bully. And you look at this board of peace that he's trying to set up, effectively to replace the United Nations. When he was asked about it would replace the United Nations, he said it might. And he's being designated the sole decider. In the United Nations, all 5 permanent members have veto powers. In the Board of Peace, there's going to be 1 veto power, and that's Donald Trump's. He's going to determine what happens with the funds, the $1 billion they have to each donate. He's going to determine where there's going to be peace, on what terms around the world. And so, we're dealing with somebody, first of all, who's delusional, who's drunken with power, drunk with his own ego, but who also is out of his mind. It's Mad King Donald, the naked emperor right now, but nobody's willing to tell him how naked he is and how disgusting a sight that is. But you look at his comment to the Norwegians. He wrote to the Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Støre, on Sunday. He said that one reason he's pushing to acquire Greenland is that Norway didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize. He wrote, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. And what's good and proper for the United States of America is to take Greenland, to incorporate Greenland. What kind of person is this? It's not even what's in America's interest. It's in what's the interest of Donald Trump's ego. And so, there might be geostrategic reasons why he wants Greenland, and we can get into that. But we're dealing with a kind of a mind, a pea brain, and vast, enormous ego, and a world of cowards and people without backbones who try to propitiate him, try to flatter him, try to bribe him, try to go along with anything he wants, rather than to say, this is a genocidal lunatic who supported genocide against the people, the Palestinians, and now is trying to replace the United Nations with something of his own concoction. We've never dealt with anything quite like this, except maybe when Hitler tried to take over the world.
Peter, I'm going to start with your Board of Peace. You talked about this Board of Peace that Trump has concocted. He's saying to become a member of it, you have to put up $1 billion. A few countries have already done that. Macron said, no way, we're not going to do it. Belarus said, we're going to put up $1 billion. We're going to join them. Belarus and Russia are connected at the hip.
Yeah.
And Trump said, I extended the invitation to Vladimir Putin. And it was reported that Putin said, we're taking it into consideration. I was shocked. I couldn't understand why Vladimir Putin, number one, just to tell him to go to hell, given what we're talking about tonight, that this guy is out of his mind. And so the question I continue to come back to, what the heck is Russia and President Putin and Lavrov thinking in the face of what you just outlined in terms of what he's done in Venezuela, pirating the ships, his threats to take Greenland, his mocking the Prime Minister of Norway for not giving him the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sitting here in Russia And I'm going, as I read all of these things we're talking about and try to keep up on it, I just don't understand why Russia keeps talking to the United States. And today, Thursday, Trump is meeting, and probably already has, with Witkoff and Kuchner. Peter, what could President Putin possibly be talking to those two real estate mafia goons? What could he, Peter, help me out. I mean, I'm at a loss for words.
I think there are two things going on. First of all, everybody plays Trump. He's so transparently shallow and narcissistic that they know that the way to get what you want from Trump is to flatter him. It's to make like you're taking him seriously, even though you're laughing at him behind his back. It's to give him money, which he wants. If he doesn't have enough money already, he's made a fortune off the presidency already. But it's not just him, it's his billionaire allies. What the Oxfam reported is that the increase in money and wealth owned by the billionaires has gone up faster in the past year than the total wealth owned by the poorest 4+ billion people on the planet. So it's partly a scam, partly a Ponzi scheme with his crypto idiocy, but also the fact that he is raving, crazy, mad, insane, out of his mind, and there's nobody standing between him and launching nuclear weapons. The system we have in the United States is that he has total control. He has access to the nuclear codes. He can launch them when he wants. So that's one side of it, that you've got a raving lunatic who can end life on the planet based on some narcissistic whim. Somebody not giving him the prize that he wants. Well, fuck you, world. You didn't give me my Nobel Peace Prize, so I'll now take this. On the other hand, they know that they can play him. They can flatter him. They can play to his vast ego, and they can get what they want out of him in the Ukraine negotiations. If they stand up to him and tell him to get lost, to go fuck himself, that they're not going to deal with him, Trump will seek revenge. So rather than having an angry, vengeful Trump, they'd rather have a Trump they can manipulate. And everybody manipulates Trump. I think even he might understand it, but that's the choice that they're making. The Europeans were pushed so far that they considered standing up to Trump. But who are these European leaders to begin with? You've got Macron in France. His approval rating is between 11 and 15% in the various polls. You've got Starmer in Britain. Lavrov made fun of it and said they shouldn't be Great Britain. We should take the great away. Starmer's approval rating is 19%. Merz in Germany, approval rating 23%. These are the people, and of course they're not going to stand up. I mean, he insults Macron, so Macron says we're not going to join. None of them have been willing to join the Board of Peace. Putin is not going to join the Board of Peace. Xi Jinping is not going to join it. They're much smarter than that. They say, well, they're supposedly about Gaza. There's no peace in Gaza. There's no path to a two-state solution. Who has joined it? Some of the states in the region and Netanyahu, a great peacenik, Netanyahu, who Machado in Venezuela had asked Netanyahu to intervene militarily to overthrow Maduro. And she also backed the genocide in Gaza, a great recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. And to clarify it, the government of Norway has nothing to do with who gets the Nobel Peace Prize. It's the Nobel Committee. And I nominated Nihon and Dankyo the year before, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was part of the delegation in Oslo. And the head of the delegation the Nobel Committee, made a great speech about nuclear abolition. And then they shame themselves, degrade themselves by awarding it to Machado, who deserves it, less than, more than Trump maybe, but less than most people on the planet. And so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but I think I understand the psychology, and I don't approve, especially of the backboneless, spineless way that so many people deal with Donald Trump in the United States and around the world.
Um, well, that's kind of what I've been thinking, that President Putin and Sergei Lavrov and the people around, some of the people around Putin, have basically been placating him to avoid any kind of outrage, any kind of threat to, additionally threat to Russia. And so they keep saying, well, we're always going to talk. We're always willing to talk. And at the same time, Peter, you know this, Russia, in the person of President Putin and Lavrov, have repeatedly said, we have got to get to the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine, which is NATO advancement since 1991. Now, Putin and Witkoff, not Putin, Trump and Witkoff have said sort of like, well, we understand Russia's concerns, but you know what? They've never come out and specifically said it's NATO that has caused Russia to respond in the way they did. And this has been going on since 1991. They've never come out and said that.
Well, Putin, I mean, Trump actually did at some point acknowledge this has a lot to do with NATO expansion. That's the thing about Trump. He could say one thing one day and another, the opposite. This whiplash that the world has, where he flip-flops. One day he's supporting Putin and he's in Anchorage and he's acknowledging Russia's legitimate concerns. And the next day he's supporting Zelensky. And the next day Zelensky's in the Oval Office and he's berating Zelensky for not showing enough gratitude to the United States. And, you know, it goes back and forth. The stupidity he was saying about NATO. NATO was set up by the United States in 1949 because it represented U.S. interests in the Cold War. You know, NATO was continued after the Cold War ended. It was a vehicle that the U.S. used. They've invoked Article 5 collective security once, and that was after 9/11. And NATO came to America's defense, not real defense, but phony defense in Afghanistan. And we've seen them in Libya. We've seen them in Syria. NATO has been a tool of U.S. hegemony, and Trump berates them and says that they're not appreciative enough, that the United States has been, you know, giving to NATO and they don't give anything back. And now we want one little sheet of ice and they won't give it to us. You know, they do want, it seems like what he wants with with Greenland is like craziness. We know that the idea was planted in his mind by Ronald Lauder, the heir to the Estee Lauder fortune, back during his first term in 2017. But there is a real strategic use for that, and that is to set up, that's because Trump has this insane idea about the Golden Dome. He says that, well, look at how good the dome is in Israel, and that they're able to shoot down most of the incoming missiles. A lot of Iranian missiles got through. It's like the Golden Sieve, not the Golden Dome. But Israel is the size of New Hampshire. The United States is vast. However, there is some malign logic to wanting to put the missile defense systems into Greenland, because Trump is talking about offensive and defensive systems. And what a lot of Russian and Chinese experts are arguing is that Trump sees this as a way to counter Russia's hypersonic and China's hypersonic missiles. They get an earlier view of them maybe make it a little easier to shoot them down, but they won't succeed in shooting them down. And they also can put offensive weapon systems there as well. So what they're doing is destabilizing the strategic stability, trying to compromise Russia's ability to strike, and therefore destabilizing everything. What we've known all along about missile defense is that it doesn't work, because so the United States now has 50 interceptors. Russia can just flood the zone with hundreds of incoming ballistic missiles, in addition to thousands of decoys. And so maybe the Golden Dome will succeed in shooting down a few. We know that in the tests that the U.S. has about 56% success rate in shooting down incoming missiles when it's a single missile, and the U.S. knows exactly where and when it's coming in these controlled experiments. There's never been experiments with hundreds of incoming missiles and thousands of decoys, which they would never be able to shoot down. So what this really will end up being is another boondoggle for America's merchants of death, the military contractors, manufacturers, these bloodthirsty, disgusting human beings who want to profit off human death and suffering.
Yeah, I question whether they're human beings, really. But Peter, you're making some really good points. This Golden Dome, as you mentioned, it's a boondoggle, just like Ronald Reagan's Star Wars.
Yes.
And the other thing is that Russia has got nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines off of both coasts. In addition to what they could fire from the land and the air, they've got these nuclear submarines that can absolutely destroy anywhere in the United States that they want. So this is the crazy.
But Richard, let me stop you there for a second, because there was an article, August 20th, 2024, in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists that said that there are two schools of thought amongst nuclear planners. One is the old deterrence theory, maintaining a second strike capability so that nobody would attack because both sides could wipe each other out. There's a second school of thought that's terrifying. That's nuclear planners who believe that with America's sonic technologies and other advanced technologies, including AI, we can actually pinpoint all of the Russian and Chinese subs and knock them out with a preemptive strike before they can attack the United States. So while that was always the leg of the triad that the planners thought was invulnerable, that they've been trying to figure out how to compromise it, that many of them believe they've now succeeded. And if the U.S. launched a preemptive strike against Russia and China, they would not be able to retaliate, defend themselves, or strike the United States. These people are insane, but this is what they believe. And so that's what makes the world so dangerous. And Putin and Xi Jinping know that there's this kind of thinking, and they say we're dealing with madmen. So we have to figure out a way to counter them, because rather than confront them, because we don't know what they're capable of.
Exactly. Peter, I want to get back to a couple of things. I think that I don't know about the Europeans, but I definitely think that the Russians have been playing Trump, continuing to want to talk to him, saying nice things about him, and entertaining Witkoff and Kuchner. I don't know if there'll be an official readout to what happened at this meeting. We'll probably find out tomorrow, because it's already at 8:00 in Moscow time. But definitely, Russia does not want to actually hang up the phone on the United States. Now, in terms of Russia's response, in the response, supposedly, to the attack on Putin's life, Russia fired the second Orezhnik to somewhere in western Ukraine, a few kilometers from Lvov.
Yep.
and not too far from Kiev. At first, it was reported that they hit this underground uh, natural gas storage place that was
Yes.
partially owned by Europe, the European Union. And then it said, no, we struck some other facility, but the impact was really devastating.
Right.
And I think the intent of Moscow was to say, look, we've got this missile and it's devastating. It wasn't nuclear. It doesn't have to be because the impact is so incredibly powerful. But it could be armed with nuclear warheads. Now, maybe that was a message. I don't know if it got through to Donald Trump or to the Pentagon. I've not seen anything about that. But Peter, what's more important for me as I'm sitting here in Crimea is what Russia has been doing in the last 2 weeks in Ukraine. Peter, it's been devastating. I know you're keeping up with this. They have been striking with all kinds of their missiles and drones all over Ukraine. Reportedly, Kiev has been without electricity, and Vladimir Klitschko, the mayor, the former heavyweight champion of the world, told the people a week ago to leave, to evacuate Kiev, to go somewhere else. And it's being reported that the lights are out all across Ukraine. No electricity, they have no water,
No heat.
and and no heat because it's winter and it's been particularly cold across that part of Ukraine. And so when you see what Russia's response is like, okay, there's all these other threats that are going around the world, but we're taking care of business right now in Ukraine. And from where I'm sitting, given what Russia is doing every single day and night to just bomb the hell out of everywhere in Ukraine, including Kiev and Lvov, I think Russia is trying to bring this issue to close and really bring about a complete and total capitulation of Zelensky's regime in Kiev and NATO and indirectly the United States. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Okay, so when the drones, the 91 drones that were targeting Putin's Novgorod home and complex there were launched, I think it was December 28th. Putin was on the phone, got on the phone with Trump and told Trump about it. And Trump said he was very angry about it. But the next day, he said he checked with intelligence and there's no evidence of an attack on Putin's home. And Putin and the Russians and Lavrov were lying about this. He said, we want to see some evidence. So the Russians turned over the chip that had the targeting information on it. Might have been January 1st. But it had specific targeting information that made it clear that it was Putin's home that was being targeted. The United States has not issued a comment about it since, has said nothing about it so far as I know. Just as the U.S. has never responded to Putin's call for extending the New START treaty for a year when it expires on February 5th. So the United States is really treating Putin in a very dismissive fashion at best. However, Scott Ritter, the former weapons inspector and an expert on weapons systems, said in a recent podcast with Ray McGovern, said that only the United States could have targeted that drone. Only the United States could have done it. It's not NATO. It's not Zelensky and not Kiev. It's only the United States. That made my head explode. The idea that the United States itself was deliberately trying to assassinate Putin. Then, so I tried to look into it with all the experts I knew. And, it's possible, if the US did that, maybe they knew that Putin wasn't going to be there. Maybe they knew these drones were going to get shot down. Were they sending a signal and a warning? Or was this a real assassination attempt? I spoke to several experts. None of them could tell me for sure if only the United States could have done the targeting, as Scott Ritter, who knows what he's talking about, but has pretty, let's say, unnuanced views on certain things, was insisting. I contacted Ted Postal, who the professor at MIT, who's been a defense insider, and he said that he certainly accepts that Putin's home was being targeted, but he didn't say whether he knew if only the US could have done it. And so that to me is pretty frightening, because it looks like there's a reasonable possibility that the US was actually the one who did the targeting here. We know, as you've suggested, that much of the intelligence, much of the targeting all along is done by the United States, but the Ukrainians do have serious capabilities, and NATO has some capabilities. Scott Ritter breaks it down step by step, which makes it sound credible. So I forgot the rest of your question, but that's the part that has kept me up at night, that it's gotten to that point, which is why I welcome what even small steps toward resolving the fighting in Ukraine. That would be in everybody's interest. But as you say, Russia has been acting more aggressively. First of all, they did say explicitly that the Oreshnik that hit in Western Ukraine was a response to the targeting of Putin's home. So that they made clear. It did send a real signal. But they've also got the Poseidons, the Burevestniks, the Sarmats, and a lot of other weapon systems that the U.S. can't stop or counter. And they have been doubling down on destroying Ukrainian infrastructure, water resources, heating resources, electricity. So the Ukrainians are really suffering directly right now. I think that they're realizing that despite all the bluster and bravado and heroic resistance, they are not going to push back the Russians. And the best that they can hope for is a quasi-stalemate with hundreds of thousands more deaths, more of their economy being destroyed, more of their infrastructure being destroyed, and never pushing Russia out. And so there seems to be increasing willingness to resolve this, which is going to be largely on Russia's terms, as we know. And I think as Witkoff and Kuchner understand on some primitive level, because their understanding is shallow, and but they don't seem, especially Witkoff, does not seem directly hostile to Russia the way a lot of Americans have been and the Europeans have been. So maybe there is some hope for more talks and getting this solved sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Personally, I think that talks with Witkoff and Kuchner, two real estate mafia gangsters, and that's what I believe they are trying to sweeten it for Putin to say, look, we can do these incredible deals that's going to bring a lot of money to you and a lot of money to America if we could just get you to agree to some things about Ukraine. But here's the thing, Peter. The United States has never shown Russia one concrete piece of evidence that they're serious. They have not ever tried to take away some or all of the sanctions, for example. They have not done anything else to show Russia that we can be trusted, because Russia knows they don't trust the words of the United States. Russia will trust what they see the United States actually doing.
Yes.
And to this point, Peter, you and I both know that Trump and the United States have not given Russia one piece of evidence that they're willing to do something to try to regain some trust from Russia. So that's where I am on the Kushner and the Witkoff and Kuchner thing. Now, in terms of Russia and the response that they're making physically in Ukraine, I think Russia realizes that it's got to go all the way. And beyond Ukraine, Russia is not willing to further escalate outside of what they're doing in Ukraine. And so I believe that's where we're at today. And I'm not sure how far Trump and his administration or the Pentagon or the deep state are willing to go. But both Russia and China are doing everything they can to not climb the escalation ladder, because they know that this can only end not good. Peter.
Yeah, no, I agree. The Europeans are a serious impediment. I look at the comment by France's top general, Fabien Mandon, who said that, told French governors that the problem with France is that we're not willing to lose our children in standing up to Russia and going to war with Russia. Macron has said that he's willing to put French troops not only in Greenland, but also in Ukraine. I look at the comments by Rutte. What a sniveling little, I don't know, horror he is. But he was saying that if Russia wins in Ukraine, then Europe is the next target. It's Rutte who flatters Trump by calling him daddy. It's Rutte who claims that he and Trump worked out the framework for which the United States will get everything it wants in Greenland without having to own Greenland. The other Europeans have not yet weighed in on this deal that Trump is bragging about having concluded. Russia and China does not want to go up the escalation ladder, but they know how dangerous this is going to be when New START expires on February 5th. That means that we're going to open up a new nuclear arms race. Trump has said he welcomes it. During his first term, he said the U.S. should increase its nuclear arsenal tenfold. That's when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called him a fucking idiot. But he still has this idea that the U.S. can win the nuclear arms race and put Russia and China in their place and win a three-front nuclear war against Russia, China, and North Korea. And you've got that kind of thinking by a man who knows very little, understands less, and only thinks in terms of a bully. His view of the world is we win and you lose. The art of the deal is not win-win like the Chinese say, it's win-lose. So the more he can punish, whether it's Denmark or Greenland, he doesn't care that nobody in Greenland wants the United States to take over, that they don't want to be part of the United States. They might not like Denmark, but they sure prefer Denmark to the United States. He doesn't care that nobody in Minneapolis wants troops in the streets of Minneapolis, that they stand up and they resist. He doesn't care about any of this. It's about power, naked power. As Trump said, the words are really revealing. He says, we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. This is not him. This is Stephen Miller, his top advisor. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. Trump says, when he was asked by the New York Times, there are any limits to his global powers, he says, yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my
Oh,
own mind.
God.
It's the only thing that can stop me. We're not dealing with a normal person. Maybe, if Trump were smarter and more in control, you would say it's like Nixon's use of the madman doctrine. He said he learned from Eisenhower that the more rash and seemingly irrational you are, the more the other side will back down. And Nixon said, I used this in Vietnam. And he says, we're going to get word out to Ho Chi Minh that Nixon's a madman. And he is ready to start using nuclear weapons in Vietnam. And he says, and Ho's going to be in Paris in 2 weeks, ready to negotiate. If Trump were smarter, we could say, well, maybe he's really thinking that way about it. But there's no evidence that Trump is even feigning being a madman. I might have mentioned to you and your listeners that Trump was giving a White House talk, a holiday Christmas talk to friends and supporters. And in the middle of it, he goes off on a 6-minute tangent about poisonous snakes in Peru. And he starts talking about black mambas and white mambas. And he says, poisonous snakes in Peru kill 28,000 people a year. 28,000. And then people looked it up. In the past 15 years, 10 people have died total of poisonous snake bites in Peru, not 420,000, 10. But when you're dealing with that level of craziness and that speech in Davos, nobody could believe how absurd, how off the wall, how mendacious, how threatening, how demeaning, and totally unhinged that speech was. So I don't know what we're dealing with, but I don't want to risk the future of life on our planet in guessing that maybe Trump is not as crazy as he seems, and not as senile, and not in the middle of a meltdown, a constant meltdown.
Peter, I'm trying to be hopeful, but on the other hand, I'm trying to be really objective and realistic. You just quickly glossed over a nuclear arms race. The foreign policy of the United States for many years has been full spectrum dominance.
Sorry.
You're a busy man. The policy has been full spectrum dominance on the land, the sea,
Yeah.
in the air, and space above.
And outer
Trump,
space too.
well, that's where I'm getting with it. He created his own space force.
Yes.
And the whole purpose of that, clearly articulated, was to, number one, deprive the opportunity of other countries access to space, and number two, to have free reign at mining whatever the companies could in the United States, those rare earth minerals or whatever are on other planets and asteroids. Now, Peter, they've clearly stated that they want to dominate space. The big argument that's starting to brew now is the Russians and the Chinese want some kind of a treaty about no weapons in space, none whatsoever. Our mutual friend, Bruce Gagnon, has been on top of this for almost the last 40 years.
Yes.
His organization is the Global Network Against Nuclear Weapons and Power in Space.
Yes.
And this is where we're at today, Peter. And this is what you're talking about, and I'm talking about. This is so frightening that where the United States really wants to go does not leave any wiggle room for for the rest of humanity to place any trust in them?
Yes. First of all, you were talking there. You said something about articulated. Now I'm going to always think of Arctic-ulated every time I hear that word or use that word. But space, I've spoken to several of the conferences, including a couple in India, of Bruce Gagnon's network, and he is the expert on the militarization and weaponization of space. The leading opponents of the militarization of space, weaponization of space has already been militarized, but the leading opponents of weaponization are Russia and China. And they've backed and introduced resolutions into the United Nations repeatedly, in which the only people who vote against it are the United States, Israel, sometimes the Marshall Islands, and pretty much nobody else. The entire world agrees that it is too dangerous to weaponize space. But the United States keeps on vetoing it, voting against it, and is intent upon arming space and has been intent upon this for years. And some of these efforts go back to the late 1950s. In response to Russia's launching Sputnik satellite in 1957, a group of US planners had an idea that to show that the US is still the world's predominant force at a time when the world was beginning to doubt that, what they wanted to do was blow up a hydrogen bomb, detonate a hydrogen bomb on the surface of the moon. Then they said, well, what we should do, after they rejected that idea as not being dramatic enough, then they wanted to set up missiles on space and on the moon, on the surface of the moon, that could shoot down the United States. So if the United States was wiped out, we could still destroy the Soviet Union from the moon. And then they said that if the Russians put missiles on the moon, we could put missiles on one of the nearby planets, and then we could shoot down the Russian bases on the moon. This is the kind of thinking that was going on. This is back in 1959 and 1960, and we've never given up these kind of crazy ideas about weaponizing space with the bolts, the bolts of lightning from space that can shoot down and destroy the Russians and the Chinese. And as you say, also go after the resources in space, the new frontier. Why shouldn't we collaborate on the exploration of space? That was Khrushchev's response when, after Russia launched, the Soviets launched Sputnik, and the U.S. talking about a space race. Khrushchev's immediate response was, let's explore space together. The exploration of the moon race was Kennedy's signature idea. But after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy also said, we should explore space together. Why should it be a competition between us and the Soviets? I mean, that's what the exploration of the Arctic. Why don't we do this together? Why does this have to be a military competition for who's going to control it? The same thing with space now. Why do we not have statesmen, world leaders, who talk about global peace and development and doing this jointly, rather than threatening each other and wasting trillions of dollars on our militaries? Trump's new military budget that he's proposing is $1.5 trillion. And that doesn't even include everything like the nuclear programs, like Department of Homeland Security. And so, we're not thinking correctly, sanely. We just celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday in the United States. King said, among other things, that we have to deal with my own government, the greatest warmonger in the world, and that we haven't lost that mentality. And it's tragic because the world could go in a different direction.
Peter, I want to end on this note, and I'm not in any hurry to finish this discussion. not enough people are talking about this, but the only hope that I see is that the United States economy and the Western economy collapses under its own weight. When we look at what's happening in the United States today, I'm not there. You are. Many of my friends who have been on this show are there. They've been talking about the economy in the United States. $38 trillion in debt, going up an additional trillion every 6 months. The 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 household debt in the United States is at $18 trillion. Part of that is all the student debt, which is billions and billions of dollars. Inflation, Trump says that's not a problem. Everybody I talk to are having trouble paying for their heating fuel this winter, are finding that every time they go in the grocery store is gone up double. Peter, when I look at what's happening in the United States and across the world, Russia, China, India have been stockpiling gold. Russia, China, India, and the rest of the BRICS now, because of Trump, are accelerating the movement to I think, more finalize new economic and financial systems that will facilitate trade, replace the INF, not the INF, the World Bank and
IMF. IMF.
The IMF, International Monetary Fund. Yeah. Okay, they're moving quickly to do this. I think what they're wanting to avoid, and they could tonight, is bring about the total economic collapse of the entire U.S. and Western order, which would also impact the rest of them. But Peter, my own opinion, and I hate to say this because it's going to affect my kids, my grandchildren, and generations, is that the United States, because of what it is doing and becoming, is going to collapse under its own weight. And Peter, you know this as well as I do, I'm sure. Leading economists in the United States and around the world are predicting that it could come this year. What are your thoughts on that as we conclude this discussion?
My thoughts are, number one, that I know a lot of people who've been predicting that the collapse could come this year have been doing so since the 1970s. When I first started working with some of these people and listening to their dire predictions. So, but the United States has been able to postpone this collapse for decades because the United States is the world's reserve currency. Now I keep on looking for the BRICS and the SCO and the Global South and working with Russia, India, and China to be trying to figure out an alternative to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And so far, there seems to be no credible alternative. So until that happens, the United States can continue to muddle through with $28 trillion of debt that keeps on growing. And if you look at Trump's plans, he increased the debt faster during his first term than anybody. And then Biden slowed it down. And now Trump is doing it again with his grandiose schemes and his idiocy in terms of loving tariffs and threatening tariffs and imposing tariffs everywhere. And the Americans are hurting. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The gap between rich and poor is growing, not shrinking. The billionaires are growing, and pretty soon we might have trillionaires. So as a planet, we're going the wrong direction. We need to figure out how to tax the billionaires all over the world so they can't run from one country to another. In the US, we want to tax them in California, and then they're Californians, Newsom even, afraid they're going to leave California and go elsewhere. So they've got that ability at this point. But we need a global movement against the super wealthy not to tax 1% or 2% of their wealth, tax 50% of their wealth. They'll still be not fabulously wealthy and not be able to spend it within the next 10 lifetimes. Why should we have this disparity of wealth? Why should some people not have enough food or enough heat or enough clothing or decent housing, while other people have got hundreds of billions of dollars? It's obscene. It is simply immoral and obscene, and that's the system we've created. And Donald Trump doesn't understand that. But he claims that all these countries are freeloading off the United States. It's back in 1948, George Kennan, the architect of the Cold War, America's containment strategy, said in a memo, the United States has 6.3% of the world's population, yet we control 50% of the world's wealth. We cannot help but be the object of envy and resentment. But the challenge before us is to maintain this position of disparity. We're not going to do it through slogans and through talk about freedom and democracy. We're going to deal by dealing with cold power concepts. That's what guided the U.S. through the Cold War, and not some benevolence, not some generosity, not spreading freedom, killing 5 million people in Vietnam, invading country after country after country, setting up this huge, vast military infrastructure around the planet, 800 bases around the planet. China's got one military base and a couple installations, but the U.S. maintains that position, maintains its economic dominance, and possibly can continue to do so. But the U.S. position is eroding. The U.S. at least used to have the fig leaf, the pretense of being the moral force in the world. We used to talk about American exceptionalism, that the United States was not only different than all other countries, the United States was better. Other countries wanted to aggrandize themselves in terms of territory, in terms of wealth, in terms of resources, while the U.S. only wanted to spread freedom and democracy. If anybody says that today, they get laughed out of the room. And Trump has made clear he doesn't believe in any of that shit. He believes in cold, hard power concepts, in grabbing other countries' resources and taking other countries' leaders, even though it goes against Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, even though it goes against the second article in the United Nations Charter. Trump doesn't care. He's open about it. So the world is changing. The so-called rules-based international order is dead. The U.S. as the world's moral force is dead. Now we have a dog-eat-dog, might makes right, power governs international order. And the world has got to say, as Jean-Paul Sartre said in 1953, after the execution of the Rosenbergs, it's got to say, America has rabies, and the rest of the world has got to shun them, avoid them, isolate them, stop them. And I think that's basically where we're at right now. It's sad, but it's also very, very dangerous.
I've been doing a series with a really an amazing woman. Alana Hartzog is her name. She's written a book, The Earth Belongs to Everyone. And it's a concept that goes diametrically opposed to this capitalist system of wanting to take everything they can from the earth, own it, possess it. It's created this class struggle that you're talking about, this great disparity of wealth. And the whole point about the earth belongs to everyone is that those people who have assumed private ownership over it have got to be taxed. And the whole tax system has got to be changed so that the rest of us are not burdened with supporting these trillions of dollars in war making and killing and everything else. And, I'd like to continue this discussion with you, Peter, because, we're talking about a system that's not working for anybody, but what is the vision of a new world order? BRICS is beginning to talk about that, but not in the terms that I would like to hear, in that it begins with all of us have a right to the earth and its resources. It's a birthright. And I think the indigenous people around the world, but certainly you and I know here in America, have had that spiritual awareness and consciousness of how to treat not only everything around them, but everything in what the Creator has provided. Peter, I can't thank you enough for this.
Richard, let me make one last point that we haven't touched on.
It's your show.
One of the things that Trump said yesterday in his ravings at Davos, is that China is pulling off the biggest hoax by expressing concern about global warming and climate change. He denounced China as selling this hoax about windmills, to these gullible people around the world, when China actually has the most windmills in China of any country. That China is leading the world in green technology. And they're still burning a lot of fossil fuels, but they are so far ahead where Trump has now pulled the U.S. out of 60 UN climate treaties, including the big Paris Accords. He's saying that the climate change is a Chinese hoax, that the U.S. is going to oppose it and increase fossil fuels. As Guterres at the United Nations said, the world is burning. As 3 American leading cardinals in Chicago, Washington, and Newark have come out with and say we need a new basis for world peace, new ideas, new thinking that shares the planet among us. And Trump is so averse to that, his little brain can't comprehend that. And he sees it again as he wants to grab things. He wants to grab the oil in Venezuela. He wants to grab the pussy of every attractive woman he sees. He thinks he can grab anything, and again, this man is an embarrassment. He's not just an embarrassment to himself. He's not just an embarrassment to his family. He's not just an embarrassment to the Republican Party. He's not just an embarrassment to the United States. Trump is an embarrassment to our species. How did we create somebody who is this vile, this cruel, this degraded, this dehuman? And then how could the Americans elect him for a second time? This is mind-boggling to me, but it has to stop.